Bat Force Radio.
Bat Force Radio is rated M for mature, or should that be immature?
Hey guys, Dustin Wynn.
Hey, this is Scott Snyder.
This is Paul Dini.
And you're listening to Bat Force Radio.
And you're listening to Bat Force Radio.
You're listening to Bat Force Radio.
This is Tom King. I write Batman Bitch, and this is Bat Force Radio.
Welcome back to Bat Force Radio, the Batman and DC podcast with no limits. We've got another fun one tonight, so let's take a quick look at the roundtable. And don't worry, guys, I think we're still the cool ones for not having anything better to do on a Saturday night. But we've got Bat Force Tom in California.
What's up, dudes?
The Bat Force Times in New York. And I'm Robin Cross in Canada. Okay, tonight's guest is an Eisner Award-winning artist known for his work on DC characters like Flash, Green Arrow, and Robin, as well as He-Man crossovers with both ThunderCats and the Injustice universe that really sort of almost fixed the entire Injustice universe, the whole problem there. His work on a trilogy of Batman Ninja Turtle crossovers with James Tynion led to an animated movie adaptation in 2019, but tonight he is slumming it with us. He's Freddie Williams.
Hey guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for taking the time to be here. How's life?
My pleasure. It's good. Keeping up with work and about to do a whole bunch of conventions back to back, but so it goes some years, and glad to be on here. Thanks for letting me come on.
We really appreciate it. You've probably got like C2E2 coming up and all that stuff.
I've got Fan Expo Vancouver, so that's Canada, and then we go to the Hawaii show, like the Amazing Aloha Con. Then I'm going to a show in Lubbock, Texas, and then after that we're going to Australia for 2 weeks for 2 shows there. And then we come back to the Kansas City, Missouri area, which is where I'm local. And then there's another show, a 3-day show there called Planet Comic-Con. So it's 6 shows in 6 weeks. And so it's every single weekend we have. Yeah, it's going to be, we've never done anything like it. My wife and I have not. So this is going to be a test of endurance, but hopefully we'll do a good job and we won't just fall apart right after we step off the plane or something. So.
But you're picking a great time of year to get out of Missouri and get to a couple tropical locations.
That is true. Yeah, I did a press junket on like some Australia morning news stuff the other day, and they so it was of course via phone, and they were saying that they're having like the worst heat wave there, and of course they're having a lot of fires. It's finally getting under control. Yeah. And I said, well, it's terrible about the fires, but I could really use some heat because here it's been below freezing. And he said, be careful what you wish for, So I guess they're having quite the heat wave there on top of just the sort of crazy natural fires and stuff. So.
And if it's hot enough that they're unhappy with the heat, ugh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. I'm excited. We have a bunch of friends in Australia, so and that the fires have been getting under control, and I guess they're getting close to. Their forecast says that it's going to be cooling down. So that might be pretty boring to hear from the listeners at home, but I'm excited to go there because I'm getting to go to Australia after it's been 2016 was our last time down there, so I'm getting to see a bunch of friends and hang out with other comic book geeks.
Awesome. Yeah, it's hard for people to make it down there. So whenever they get somebody that they really really want to see, it's a treat for them. So that's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it. So,
has your wife done many shows with you? Like, does she normally go and do shows with you?
Yeah, she does the majority of the shows. She's my business partner and my full-time art assistant, and she helps me out quite a bit, and we travel together and stuff. So we get along very well, fortunately. And she's doing all but the Texas show with me. That one I'm going to do with one of my best friends. He's going with me. But
I was going to say, Texas.
Man. What's that?
Convincing. Oh, sorry.
I just said, no offense, Texas. She doesn't want to go to Texas.
Oh, no. Not that actually. That she's just going to be here preparing. Since Texas is right before the Australia show, she's staying here to do all the packing and stuff like that. So
cool.
Yeah, no offense, definitely.
Congrats on winning the Super Bowl, by the way.
Oh yeah, there was sports game, and somebody won. That was local.
Sports
No, I'm
ball.
yeah,
You guys
I'm not.
won. What game?
I'm not totally oblivious to it, but I'm not at all into sports. So I heard like, my wife went over to a Super Bowl party and she was having a great time. And apparently the game, when it ended, there was just a ruckus outside of the studio and fireworks and a few gunshots. I could hear some gunshots, and then
man.
a couple of what had to have been like quarter sticks of dynamite or something. Like, so I'm not even joking. Like my cat ran out of the studio and like the walls had shaken. I could feel it in my chest. I was like, oh, I guess we won. Question mark. And then, my Kiki, my wife, got a hold of me and was very excited. So she filled me in officially, but it's great for everyone who's into sports. I'm just not particularly into sports.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because the Kansas City Police Twitter account, verified Twitter account, tweeted, "Guys, it's a Super Bowl, not the Purge."
Yeah, that's appropriate. It sounded crazy outside.
Yeah, so I thought it got kind of wild.
Well, the thing that I like to start off with talking to people about is, was there one particular thing, like was there a moment in your young life that made you think, oh, look at this, this is what I want to do, I want to be an artist?
Definitely, yeah. I had always had an aptitude or an interest in it from the time I was, a kid, and I would sometimes ask my teachers if I could stay in from recess just to draw. So, and they would let me, usually because it's such a quiet activity. And so I always had an interest in it. But whenever I was around 14 years old, I saw Jim Lee's X-Men number 272, which was a part of the Extinction Agenda. And we had a garage sale that day, and I took some of my, some of the money I'd made from the garage sale on my bike, went up to the local sort of convenience store, and on a spinner rack, that's where I saw X-Men 272. And I opened it up and I saw that 2-page spread. It's during the Extinction Agenda where all the X-Men, some of the X Factor and stuff are on stage in Genosha being held on trial. And it's got, it's a double-page splash, and there's all these like little name boxes basically to identify this cast of 30 characters or whatever it is. And it just stopped me in my tracks. It was just so well drawn and had so much, detail and energy, and I'd never seen anything like it. I'd seen comics, of course, but this was the first time I had seen Jim Lee, his work. And so that was the book I picked up that day. And then within like a month or so, I had gone to my local library and saw ElfQuest. It was like a collection of ElfQuest, like a graphic novel. And ElfQuest is drawn by Wendy Penny. And it was drawn back mainly in the 70s. Of course, she drew stuff, she's drawn stuff in the 80s, 90s, whatever. But this book was in the 70s. But it was ahead of its time. It looked fresh. The inking style was slightly dated, but not by much. And other than that, it was ahead of its time or contemporary for the time I was reading it. And it still looks fantastic. We have artist editions and all the stuff with the ElfQuest stuff. So the combination of Jim Lee's X-Men and Wendy Penny's ElfQuest made me feel like I wanted to draw comic books for a living, and I started taking it pretty seriously after that, and then it's a long road after there.
And I do know that a little bit of your history was that you had brought a portfolio with you to a con, and got yourself in the door just via the quality of your work. We've all heard of stories of people knowing a person who knows a person, to help them get in, or they make a contact and then that person puts in a good word for them. And those are very legitimate and very handy ways sometimes of getting in. But I got in essentially by what would we consider the front door. So I got in, taking a portfolio to the San Diego Comic-Con of 2005. And there was an art director there named Richard Bruning, who worked at DC Comics at the time. And he liked my work. He gave me a mostly favorable review. Of course, there was still lots of stuff to work on, but he felt like I was ready. And over the next couple of months, I stayed in contact with him, showing him updated pages that I was working on that kind of addressed his criticisms, because he had made some good points in our review. And then that's what gave me. He got my work in front of Peter Tomasi, who at the time was a senior editor at DC Comics, and Peter is the one who gave me my first work, which was on Seven Soldiers, Mr. Miracle.
which was written by Grant Morrison, and talk about pressure. For my first gig at DC, no pressure, kid. And we had the book was behind schedule. That's one of the reasons I got hired. And so I had 3 weeks to draw 30 pages worth of work. So I had to finish up eight pages in issue 2. There was 24 pages in issue 3. And then there was a cover that I needed to do. So I think whatever that adds up to, but it was a very fast turnaround. And, that's what launched me into DC. And, oh man, thinking about that now actually gives me a little bit of anxiety.
Yeah, no way.
But it was great. And I'm really happy that it worked out.
Wasn't that book the Eisner win?
Correct. That
Yes.
series.
Wow.
So, so Seven Soldiers, the series, which involved Frankenstein and Mr. Miracle and the Bulleteer, I think is the name of the character, and several other characters. All of them were an interconnecting series that Grant Morrison wrote. Grant Morrison wrote all of them, and they all connected together. And that series won the Eisner. And so I won 1/16 of an Eisner, something like that. Which was, even that is an honor. I heard about it later. It was, and I was like, oh, wow, neat. But I wasn't at the ceremony or anything.
So
That's a great way to kick in the door, though.
Yeah. Were you able to have any kind of back and forth with Grant Morrison during that time?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, I sent him the script for issue 4 was running kind of behind. So Peter Tomasi, the editor, had told Grant to just send it directly to me as soon as he was done. And I got it over a weekend. And I did something that I've since been told I shouldn't do in general, which is don't fanboy out, I think is the advice I got.
Right.
So I sent him this email, and I'm sure he was like, who's this guy? Because I was basically a fill-in artist for the original artist, which was Pascal Ferry. He was originally going to be drawing Mr. Miracle, and through us, several series of circumstances, he ended up over at Marvel, and then some other stuff happened. So he never replied to that email. Grant Morrison did not, but I in the script for the 4th issue, which is the final issue of Mr. Miracle. I don't know if Grant Morrison was just feeling, particularly wordy that day, but he had all these asides. It would be sort of his train of thought. He was just sort of rambling in the text in the script, and then would say, "But anyway," even in the script, "But anyway," and then get back to what he was saying. So that kind of felt like a back and forth, but it wasn't really. Cool. It was just it was an interesting way to see how another person would write, because nobody's written like that since. I've worked with Mark Waid and James. I was about to say Tynion, but I think it's Tinian, and Adam Beechin and Tim Seeley and all these great writers that I love to work with. And Mark Guggenheim and Fred Van Lente, but none of them write like that. I've never seen anyone write almost like they're in a journal and you're reading it and there happens to be a script in the middle of it, You
kind of seeing his stream of conscious almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that was entertaining.
What was what did initially? How did it get brought up to you that, oh, by the way, you're going to be drawing these pages for a Grant Morrison book? What was your reaction to that?
I felt intimidated, but I felt like there's been several times in my career. In general, I'm very basically my whole life is about drawing comics, and that's been my main interest. And so I'm very excited to get started on a project. My ambition just kind of kicks in, and I just can't wait to get started, especially. Now, about halfway through, I feel like I'm inside of an abyss, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm exhausted," and I'm only halfway through. But anyway. So at the beginning, though, whenever I first got the phone call from Peter Tomasi, at the time I was working at Hallmark Cards. That was my full-time job, which is located here in Kansas City. And I got a call on Friday, which is normally my day off. I worked 4 10s at Hallmark, and I had Fridays off. So I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize, and I answered it, and it was Peter Tomasi, and he said, I remember his tone of voice, but I can't do accents and stuff, but he has a bit of a New York accent. And he had said, I saw your portfolio. I think it looks great, and I'd like you to finish up the. He was like, I'd like you to finish up the Seven Soldiers, Mr. Miracle series.
Damn.
And yeah, and the way he was saying it was, it almost sounded like he thought I would just be like, oh, okay, yeah, no big deal. But I was like, really?
Yeah.
Please do. And this is the first time I've said this in any interview. But he apparently he sent the reference and script and all that stuff to the wrong address somehow.
Oh shit.
And so like a couple days went by because he said, I'm going to FedEx it today. You should have it on Monday. And I was like, I can't wait, but the package didn't come. And then I was like, uh-oh. Either I was afraid that something had fallen apart, meaning maybe they decided not to hire me or something,
Oh my
or maybe
God.
I gave the wrong answer or something. And so because I had taken Monday off from my regular work at Hallmark to be home and just ready to dive into this project. And so I waited until Tuesday just in case it was like maybe I misunderstood him and I still hadn't had it. So I called him and very sheepishly said, I still haven't had it. And he was like, really? Oh, I thought you already had it and you were working by now. So he either sent it again or maybe the first time it never got sent. I don't know, but I verified my address and I got right on it. It was this was October of 2005. So it's very in my mind because of how impactful it was in my life.
Are they still doing it that way where they mail stuff out like that, or
they mail out? I think it's creator dependent, but in general, they're probably not. They're probably. Yeah. I could email or call or whatever and request like a packet of DC paper. That would be maybe the typical thing that they would mail. But I think there are some older artists who, maybe not all older, but mostly it would probably be older artists who are used to getting a physical mailed to them or physical reference material or something. But for the most part, it's all email and then FTP and stuff on the back end once you're ready to upload.
I would imagine just like opening my mail and getting a packet that wasn't supposed to be for me, and it's like the script and all this stuff from like DC Comics about an upcoming project, and I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah, if it got shipped to somebody else, I wonder what they thought if it ever did get to some place. Or it's likely I think that they just didn't ship it the first time or something. I don't really know. To be honest, I don't really know, and I don't even know if Peter would remember at this point because it's been 15 years or whatever. So
what a way to start, man. That's crazy.
Thanks. Yeah, I got really lucky with that, and I kind of owe my career to double booking schedules and artists who were late and stuff like that. So I have made sure to never miss a deadline, and so far I haven't missed any deadlines. I've had some deadline extensions where I've asked for a few extra days, but I usually do that like halfway through the deadline because I can project into the future how much time I'll need. But I've officially never missed a deadline, so I'm happy about that.
I would think that the better thing for you to do would be to sort of pay it forward, miss some deadlines so that some other new guy gets a chance.
No.
Yeah.
That would be. I don't know. It would make me not be able to sleep at night. The idea that I'm behind on a deadline, it ruins my personality. I become very short and curt and get no sleep and just work because you can work out that problem. You can just work until you got caught up.
Yeah. It's I think like it seems like there's been some books both with like Marvel and DC where they've been double shipping a month, but you've been lucky to have been on projects, at least it seems recently, where like you're the only artist on it, you're not double shipping, it's a monthly title. Has there been situations where you feel just like completely overwhelmed though, where like your office is like crumbling on top of you?
There has been a few times, yeah. I mean, like I had said earlier, as far as halfway through a deadline, I'll start to feel a bit overwhelmed. But usually at the beginning of a project, that's where the most work and creativity has to start, because you're designing characters at the same time you're coming up with rough layouts and you're perhaps giving feedback to the writer for story or plot if they're open to that sort of thing. Yeah. And that can feel the most scattered because your brain's trying to work in several different ways at the same time, at least for me. have a very compartmentalized way of thinking or working. So I usually would rather think about design stuff separate from other types of creative things because it's just a different function or something. But I think with about halfway through the first Batman Ninja Turtles was probably where I felt the most like, what have I gotten myself into here? Because the first issue was drawn almost without a deadline in mind. It was like Jim Chadwick, who was the editor for the project, who I owe a huge debt to because of him choosing me to draw that project really changed the trajectory of my career in a great way. But he, we drew the first issue kind of freeform a bit, where I was telling him when I would get things done. And then after I got the first issue done, I remember I was working on what I call basically spot blacks of the second issue. So I had done what I call wireframes, which are like structure drawings for all the second issue. And then I was like Xing out stuff. My wife Kiki helps me with ink assist and stuff. So she'll like fill in large areas of black and stuff. And I was Xing all this stuff out. And I got the email that had the schedule for the second or for the rest of the series. And a cold shiver went down my spine because ink wash is a very laborious and time consuming process. And this was the first series that I had drawn in ink wash. And so I was already feeling a little bit of fatigue that I had not felt in series that I was using a more simplified art style. And so the real test of that sort of, the real test of your abilities or something is to be able to maintain the same style throughout or improve upon it ideally. And that was very scary. Now it ended up working, and a large part of that is my wife Kiki helps me out a lot. So she'll help scan in the pages and fill in blacks and help me with color flats because I was doing colors for the covers and a whole bunch of stuff. She'll template pages for me, and I mean she does almost everything at the house that's not drawing. So counting on her to help to take some of the pressure off.
Yeah, that sounds lucky that you got her right there. That's awesome.
I agree. It is awesome, and I'm very lucky to have her around. And she sometimes feels embarrassed whenever I mention that stuff because she says that's okay. You don't have to mention it. Like, meaning she's not craving the recognition, but she definitely deserves it.
Definitely. I mean, I know that it was a definite look that first series for sure came out with. Was there what was the decision behind doing it all ink wash? Was that just your decision and you wanted to see how it would look?
It was, let's see, I had done an 8-page short story of Conan back when Dark Horse owned the rights to publish Conan. I did an 8-page short story, and it was all in ink wash, and I even colored it as well. And that was my proof of concept. I had been doing some ink wash stuff before that, and I just enjoy the style. It's very versatile, and I never get bored with it. There's always something different with it. And since the original Eastman Laird Ninja Turtles, which is to me the Ninja Turtles, that's my Ninja Turtles in my mind. The original black and white stuff had a very gritty feel. And if you're not looking real close, it looks like it's in gray scale, but it's actually a bunch of individual lines called duo shade. It kind of creates a halftone in the old black and white printing process. But when you look at it from further away, it looks like grayscale. And then there's all this spatter, so it's very gritty. That feeling it just worked for the Ninja Turtles. And I had already done a few, I had done a cover for IDW and some like pinup pieces and stuff of the Turtles in that style. And so it worked. And Batman is very versatile, and you can go pretty gritty with him and his surroundings and stuff. So so this is how lucky I was. I had heard for like 2 years, Bobby from IDW, who's the editor for the Ninja Turtles, had mentioned to me, we might be doing some crossover stuff with, stuff at IDW and DC Comics. But since it had been 2 years since he had first told me that, I assumed that deal had fallen through because that kind of stuff falls apart all the time, business stuff. And then one day I was on Twitter and I saw that there was an announcement of a Green Lantern Star Trek crossover. And so that's, DC and IDW. And I thought, if this crossovers happening. There's probably other the sort of legalese has probably been worked out, and there's other stuff that's in the works too. So I emailed Jim Chadwick, my editor at the time, and I didn't know he would be involved in these. I just emailed him anyway and said, hey, I heard about the Green Lantern Star Trek thing. If there's other crossovers, or like a Ninja Turtles Batman thing, I'd love to draw it. Keep me in mind. And then I linked him to the Ninja Turtle stuff that I had drawn on my website. It was all ink wash and stuff. And now that day he replied and he said, okay, great, we'll keep that in mind. But later he said, we joked in the office that you must have been psychic because we were talking about artist choices for that series that day.
No way.
And my email just happened to come in at the right time. And I never have good timing, by the way.
Wow.
I always have bad timing, where once Mike Carlin told me, yeah, we were talking about you for a Grant Morrison written Superman book, but we thought you were busy with other stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I couldn't get it out of my head. This was years ago. Like I couldn't get it out of my head. And I kept emailing Mike and I was like, are you sure there's no chance that this could still happen? And he wrote back and he said, no, the decisions have been made. And if I knew it was going to eat you up this much, I would have never told you, like that.
Oh man. Yeah.
Telling me like to make me feel good that I was in the running, but I just freaked out. Anyway, with the Batman Ninja Turtles thing, Jim Chadwick had joked that I must have been psychic. I'm not, of course. And basically this was a couple months before we actually started. So the series was they had already chosen James as the writer, but he was still working on outline ideas and pitches and stuff like that of which direction to take it. And I had it in my mind that the series was going to fall apart, or that another artist who was of higher profile was going to kind of muscle me out of the way or something. I was convinced it was going to happen because like a month would go by. Right. And I wouldn't have heard of anything. And I'm like, oh, I've probably lost the project. I just know it's happened. And then I would check in and they'd say, no, it's, everything's good. So I did like two covers, the covers for the first two issues. And those were used for sort of my proof of concept. So it'll be ink wash and I colored them. So I was like, and this is what it looked like in color. And they're like, yeah, looks good. Looks fine to me. They were very open and just freewheeling with, either James and I were doing exactly what they wanted, or, they just agreed with what our approach was, or they weren't keeping that close of an eye on it. I really don't know.
Right.
I would like to think it's because we were doing exactly, we were naturals for the project, but I don't really know that for sure.
So you had already been chosen as the artist, right? You weren't like just doing this to show them, oh, this is what I could do?
No, I had already been chosen.
Okay.
But was making clear to them that ink wash was the specific art style I was going to draw this in. And then I drew like a series of style guides for myself where I was making clear to them, this is how I'm going to draw Batman. Are you okay with this? This is how I'm going to draw the Turtles. Are you okay with this? Because these are, important intellectual properties. I wanted to make sure that my intentions were clear going into it. And they just said, yeah, it looks great. So, yeah. It's surreal when I think about it because of how big of a change that made in the trajectory of my career and my life and everything.
Yeah, we want to ask you about that. I remember being at San Diego. Was that 2016 when it was announced?
Yes. No, it was at the it was 2015.
2015. So I remember being at San Diego 2015, and it was like an eruption. No movie, no trailer. Nothing else was getting as much word of mouth at that show as much as Batman Ninja Turtles crossover. That was literally the biggest news. Like, by all accounts, anywhere you turn, whoever you were talking to at that show, that was the biggest news that day when it was announced. So I remember it, like, blew the F up. You know what I mean? How far into the process were you already when you started to see the expectation build for the book?
I had the first two covers done. And then I had style guides done, and that was it. Wow. So when I say style guides, I mean like an 11 by 17 sheet of paper for each of the main characters, just sort of exploring different expressions and shapes and proportions. Yeah. And that was it. So, and I did not have the script yet. I'm assuming that James was writing. Yeah, exactly. So it was like a lot of positivity and people coming over and saying, do you have the covers here? And I did. I brought them. And I showed them to them, and they were like, oh, my gosh, this is what it's going to look like. And I said, yeah. And they liked that. The majority of the people who came over liked that I was referencing or homaging or heavily influenced by the original Eastman Laird Turtles. They like the muscle mass and the grittiness and stuff.
Right.
And I'm very influenced by the Eastman Laird turtles. And that was the first time I met Kevin Eastman as well. I went by the IDW booth, and he fake strangled me because he said, and I'm not joking, I have a photo of him fake strangling me with his hands around my neck because he said, he was like, "This is going to be such an effing cool project.
Yeah.
I wish I was drawing it." And then I said, "Come on, let's get some photos, one goofy one and one normal one." And then he fake strangled me, and there was a photo, and he said, "Okay, now let's do the goofy one." And because it was as if that was his real feelings. But anyway, what a great guy. Since then, we've become friends and have worked on stuff together and hung out and stuff. And that's a real lifelong dream come true as well. So.
It's funny because real quick shout out to two of my buddies, Alex Kuehls and Andy Leigel. They used to work at Collector's Paradise in Pasadena. Andy now has his own shop in Santa Clarita. But I remember they're the two biggest Ninja Turtle fans that I know. So when that news was announced, Andy, I think, was working at Boom at the Boom booth. So I went over to Boom. I was like, "Dude, did you hear about Turtles?" And he was kind of like, Yeah, I heard about it. And then, you know what I mean? And then I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then I went over to my buddy Alex. "Did you hear about Turtles?" He's like, Yeah, I heard about it. And then it was probably a couple of weeks until we were back home. And then I went to the shop, and I was like, and I think maybe it was longer than that, but I think samples or something had come out. Maybe it was when they had already put out like previews for it or something, and that's when your art obviously had gone out to the public. And so I was like, "Dude, did you see the preview to Turtles?" And both of them were like, "Yeah, dude, it's gonna be sick." So it's like they were kind of skeptical at first about like their precious Ninja Turtles, coming into this project. But I think once they saw your art, they were like, "Oh no, this is gonna be legit." So definitely, yeah.
I'm happy to hear that I won them over. That's great.
Yeah, it was just kind of funny. I was like, "Man, these snarky fools." Yeah.
But I can understand their hesitance. I mean, especially if they thought to look up my name and look at the type of artwork I was drawing, and I like the art style, the previous art style I was drawing in 4 different projects. But it's a much more abbreviated, much less detailed sort of art style. So it's possible that they looked at the older stuff and thought, this is going to look too clean or too bad, or whatever they might have thought. So I can understand that.
It was actually, I just remembered now too, before that announcement at that show, my buddy Alex had bought original pages from Eastman. And so it was before your project was announced. So obviously he was a huge Eastman fan, and he had, a page of it already. He was kind of showing me, so that when the news was announced, he was almost like almost like shaking a little bit. But yeah, Turtle fans were definitely happy when they started seeing your stuff come out. How did you feel that it was kind of building, and did you get that sense from the fan reaction that people were really, really going to expect, like they were having high expectations for this?
No, I didn't. And by the time, the first issue came out, first of all, I don't pay attention to online, reviews or hype. Yeah, because it can go south pretty quickly, and I just never want that in my brain to make me. I want to do the thing that is instinctual to me or me and the creative team, and I don't want to be trying to cater myself or the art style or the storyline, if I'm involved with that, to something that somebody said online that I have no idea who they are or what their sensibilities are. It could be that for them this is going to be terrible, but it could be also that it's not really for them, or they just like to complain, because you get a lot of that too. So no, I had no idea. So the first issue came out, and I was already working on issue 4, and it's a 6-issue miniseries. So by that point, we're kind of beyond the point of retooling anything, even if we'd wanted to. And the look had already been established well in advance before that. So no, I didn't really know about it until I didn't know that there was going to be so many cover variants for the first issue. So I got this complimentary box of copies of the first issue, and I was like, oh my! I was like, this is issue 1, because it was like 30 books or something.
Yeah.
And sorry, my voice cracked like I was going like I was like 14 years old again.
You're excited.
Yeah. I was just shocked to see that. So my wife Kiki and I spread them all out over this table and took a photo. We're like, can you believe that this is this many variants or whatever? And then issue 2 was almost like short run, because there's a certain algorithm. I'm not aware of the specific numbers, but there's a certain algorithm that comic book publishers use. Like, if the first issue sells X number, then you reduce the percentage for the issues 2 and then 3 and 4. There's like a certain formula they use. And issue 1, they just assume, well, there's so many variants. That's why the sales are so high on issue 1. And we're going to really drop down for issue 2. And so issue 2 is actually the most, like, the first run of issue 2 is the most valuable of the series, because I guess they, as in the publishers, assumed that there would be a large amount of orders for issue 1, but weren't sure that it would have the sort of, longevity or the interest of actually reading it and enjoying it. So issue 2 had to go into like 4 printings, which I've never, so there was, I don't know, that's quite the compliment. We were very excited to hear that, James and I. So anyway, no, I had no idea that it would be received that well. I'm very happy that it was. And in the subsequent years since that, because it's been almost 5 years now, or 4.5, whatever, the amount of positive feedback that I get from people, and I can tell it's genuine, I really appreciate it. It's the best sort of feedback that, an artist can get, is that it's made some people want to draw their own book, or get tattoos of my version of the Ninja Turtles on their body, like my artwork's on their body. That's surreal to see. And it's, complimentary, and I'm happy.
Yeah, definitely a testament. I mean, it's one thing for the hype to kind of get built up when something's announced, but I felt like, that's proof right there that after the first issue came out, the hype train was still rolling fast with how people were responding to it.
And also, it must say something that there was, while you and James did this Batman Ninja Turtle crossover, there was the other one that Matt Manning and John Samariva did, and that one was great too, but it hasn't gotten to the point of getting follow-up series yet. And you and James already got 3 volumes.
Yeah, I don't know what that says exactly. Other than I love, first of all, John Samariva is actually one of my best friends in real life. Like, he's one of the Australian artists that I hang out with when we're there. He actually found out that he was going to be drawing that series while he was here in my studio while we were doing. No, I'm not joking. They originally were going to do a Justice League Ninja Turtles crossover that he was going to draw. But then they switched it to a sort of animated adventure visual, Batman Ninja Turtles. And I love that series. It looks great. Too. And it, even if John, who is my friend, hadn't drawn it. So as far as like their independent or IDW's decision on what to publish, or, that they didn't do subsequent series in that vein or whatever, that's, sort of their decisions. But I'm happy to see that. That it had this alternate sort of more visually cartoony, or the more animated styling, I thought looked great. And John's connection to the Turtles before that made that work, but then he was homaging some of Bruce Timm's animated stylings in the Batman side of things. I thought it looked, great. But yeah, the fact that so if you count them, that's a total of 4 series. That's how I look at it. There's been 4 series of Batman and Ninja Turtles material.
Yeah, that's awesome that you and John are so close. When their series was running, both John and Matt had joined us separately to talk about that run.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I didn't know that. So you know how funny and charismatic of a person that John is.
Absolutely.
He is a cut up. He's a cut up. We love to, when we're hanging around, he's always got us laughing. So
yeah, us too. Yeah, it was a good time. Now we've been speaking so much about the ink wash technique that you were using for this, but it's not the only thing you're known for. You actually wrote something like 10 years ago. You wrote the DC Comics Guide to Digitally Drawing Comics. Mm-hmm. How did that come about? How does that project end up in your lap?
Shortly after I was had started getting work from DC. So whenever I was drawing, I think around the time I was drawing Robin, DC had approached me about doing an exclusive. So that would mean, I was guaranteed a certain amount of work, and then I would, could not go outside of DC for doing illustrations and stuff. And I was excited about this, but at the time, I had been putting together a pitch for a how-to book about digitally drawing comics that I was going to pitch to. There's a series of books about Photoshop illustrating or Photoshop techniques and stuff, and so I was going to take it that route. I was going to try to get into that line of books, and I was still working on the pitch though, and I hadn't started actually pitching or talking to people yet in the Adobe realm. But I had brought that up in my exclusive. I said, is that okay? Because it's not me drawing a book, but I will be drawing examples to put into this how-to book. And that's it felt like it might be a gray area, and I didn't want to overstep any bounds. And the legal guy at DC that I was talking to, he said, well, why don't you just pitch it here? And I was like, oh, yeah, you guys have a how-to line. And it didn't even occur to me. It's like I was picturing it the Adobe Photoshop route as opposed to the inside the comic book realm, the how-to, they have a how-to write, pencil, ink, and then they have one that was coloring and lettering together in the same book. And so that's how it came about. As far as me working digital, I was working for a small, I did a whole bunch of independent stuff that no one's ever seen, or the publishing house, took the work, acted like they were going to publish it, and it never got published and stuff before getting into DC. And at the time I was working with, so this would have been in like 2000-ish, maybe 99 or something. I was working with an independent writer/editor who was very picky with what he wanted me to do. Now, partially it was because I was not as skilled, and also because he was just a picky individual. So he was always asking for these revisions in the layouts and stuff. And I would, have to like erase a bunch of stuff and redraw it, or I'd have to redraw it on another piece of paper, then kind of merge it together in Photoshop. And then I just started like roughing out digitally, because I thought that would be a faster way to edit stuff if he had choice, or if he had changes for me to make. And I just kept progressing. Like I'll do more detailed drawings, more like the structure drawings. And then I started just seeing if I could ink an entire panel and then page. So that's what evolved very naturally as far as me working digital. But I had no idea at the time if other artists were working digital, or if they were using the same techniques or Photoshop or anything like that. But by the time I was working for DC, the majority of my work was digital. Not all of it, but the majority was. And it really helps your speed for sure. Plus I was drawing a much simpler style. And so after talking about the exclusive, I then flew to New York. That's where DC was at the time. And I brought my laptop and my little Wacom tablet and showed them, sort of an example of how I work. And they said, yeah, we love this. We'll sign you an editor and we'll get you started. And your DC or your sequential work will take priority, but we can work this in the background. So for, 2.5 years or something in the background, me and John Morgan, who was my editor, put together the how-to book. So it did come out in September of 2009. So it's been over 10 years now that it's been out, which feels impossible, but it has been.
Maybe also means it's time for another volume.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
Of an art book.
Yeah. I would love to do. I love doing how-to stuff. The art style working in ink wash is so laborious and time-consuming. It's difficult to fit in other things, because if there's an amount of time I have to focus on another task, usually I could be making the current project I'm on better. So I don't have a lot of free time, and it's difficult for me to fit that in. But I would love to do either a revised DC Comics guide to digitally drawing comics, or another approach entirely, even if it wasn't connected through DC Comics.
Good people of Gotham, this is Bat Force Tom's wife. Thank you for listening to Bat Force Radio. Now will you take the trash out?
Fine, God, do it now.
Yeah, the next thing would be the Robin 80th anniversary special that's coming out. It's coming out in mid-March, and I have an 8-page story in there that where Adam Beechin and I teamed up again. He's the first writer that I worked with on Robin, so we're doing this 8-page story that connects back to the storylines that we were doing back then. Tim Drake is my favorite Robin, and so it's great to team back up with Adam Beechin and work with him on Robin again. After that, then do the covers and stuff like that.
Pretty badass.
Thanks.
I just want to express my gratitude for your hard work because so I'm a 90s kid, and I'm the kid who ran home after school to adjust my antenna to watch Batman the Animated Series and the Ninja Turtles when I got home. And it's like 20 years later, a generation later, we have a Batman Ninja Turtle crossover that you have visually spearheaded, and it has become super effective and relevant and fun and cool. And, now we even got an animated movie, which is crazy, and 3 volumes. Well, 4, 4 total. So,
yeah.
Action figures.
And just, of this cross. And it's just so awesome. So I definitely wanted to, thank you for your hard work. What you've done so far with the Batman Ninja Turtle universe, because it's just, for kids of my generation that, were watching those cartoons, we could have never imagined something like this. And it could have went really wrong as well. It's like, it's one of those things where I was so excited for, but at the same time, I'm like, I hope it works. I hope they make it work. I hope hope the story's right. I hope it works visually. And, not just anybody could do that. That's just the truth. So, yeah, man. Thanks for your hard work, man.
And that's
Thank you so
another part.
much.
Okay, you talked about that time where you found out that you were going to get to draw this series, that you were going to get to cross over Batman and the Ninja Turtles. How did it come about that you found out that what you had created had helped spawn this animated adaptation?
I heard about it gradually. Like, I'm trying to think of who told me, but there was a couple. There would be like at San Diego Comic-Con, somebody whom I wouldn't know would walk up to me and say,
"Oh, wow,"
and they'd say, "I work at Nickelodeon," like they're whispering to me, and I'm just letting you know that there's an animated movie in the works.
They got the McGruff trench coat and hat on, and they're in the shadows in the corner.
Yeah,
like, hey.
Yeah. And if you follow me to the bathroom, I can.
Whoa!
But
got dark.
Yeah, that only happened once. But okay. There would be people who would occasionally say, that they heard rumors, or they knew somebody who was working on the sort of style guides for the, for the visuals or whatever of the animated movie. But stuff like that can fall apart quite easily as well. Stuff can get into production for a year and still just never be made. So there was a couple of years where we would hear about it, and James would get a hold of me and say, "Hey, did you hear this or that?" And then we saw like a rumor published online, but we all know that rumors are just rumors. Sometimes they're just clickbaity stuff. And so I found out officially at the same time as everyone else. But I've been hearing some rumors and stuff in the background for, I don't know, a couple of years. And so James James and I both got emailed by Jim Chadwick, our editor at the time, that that Jim could officially tell us that the project was definitely happening. And then like later that week, it was announced online and stuff that it was happening.
Have you watched it?
Mm-hmm.
What did you think?
We watched the day it came out. It was, I had an out-of-body experience. It's the only time I've had that in my life where...
Aside from when someone asks you to follow them to the bathroom.
It's like when Kiki and I were watching the Batman versus Ninja Turtles animated thing, the setup is very similar to mine and James series, and
right.
Visually it's very different. But I like Andy Kuhn. He's an artist who did a lot of the sort of style guide exploration for the animated stuff. He's a great artist. So the art style was different, but story beats, they were hitting some of the same beats, and then they get to the warehouse, and there's, in our comic book, there's a confrontation between Batman and the Shredder where basically Shredder throws down a smoke bomb and then escapes. But it's kind of like we're aware of each other, we're sizing each other up, and now Shredder has left. And that's about to happen in the animated thing, in the animated movie, and then they start fighting, and I felt like that's what I had, the out of body experience. It was like I was witnessing a different reality the one, because I'm very familiar with the story, of course, and suddenly I'm saying the comic book version of the story, and then suddenly I was seeing a different take on it, and it was as if I was seeing a different reality. It was surreal and hard for me to describe. So, but it was enjoyable to see such a familiar thing be different. And that fight scene between Batman and Shredder was fantastic. And I was like, man, I wish we did that
so
in our comic. And
damn it.
Yes, yeah. I was like, because I wish we had, James and I kept making jokes. This was years ago, that we needed, like another 10 pages per issue because we wanted to have more fights and all this stuff. And that's what popped into my mind, was like, I wish we had more room that we could have done a longer fight scene between Shredder and Batman. And so anyway, it was it ended up going more and more different from what we had written, or from what the stuff that was in the first story. I didn't actually write. I helped to plot some of the fight scenes and stuff like that throughout the series, but that was about it. Than what had happened in our story. But it was great to see a different take. The fight scenes were incredible, and I congratulate them for making such a successful and cool animated project. So it's really strange, though, to see see it divert in that way. Strange for me because I was so intimately connected to it.
It's like watching your kids grow up and then like make their own choices
and fight each other.
Or it'd be like if you raised your kids and wasn't aware, and then you saw a home video, and in the middle of the video they started kung fu fighting, and you'd be like, this did not happen. I was there, It was more like that, But there's video evidence of it right there.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it speaks very highly of all the people involved. So we have 4 volumes of comics plus an animated movie, and none of it has been a disappointment to fans. Like, none of it has had fans going,
this sucks.
I'm happy to report that there's people who have expressed. I remember once John and I were next to each other at New York Comic Con of, I think it was 2017, and somebody would walk up to John and say, I love your version of the Batman Ninja Turtles. That other version is so dark and gritty. I hate it. And they're like saying it loud enough that I can hear, but they don't know that I'm connected, or they don't realize it, or don't care. I don't know. And then the same type of thing would happen where somebody would walk up to me and say, I love your version, and I don't like the version that John had drawn. And, other than that, I haven't really heard any negatives. And even then, when we would get that feedback, it's like, that's your preference. That's cool. But I actually like what John did. And I would, gesture over to him and say, he's standing right there. And I think he did a great job on, his styling. It's different, of course, but
why don't you tell him yourself that he sucks?
Yeah. John standing there with his arms crossed and his muscles bulging. Like, what did you say about me? No, it was always civil, but it was, that's probably the only negative I heard. And that's very much just a preference,
Right. I can't wait to go to the next con to see you guys sitting next to each other to say that I loved your version best to each of you.
Loud enough on purpose.
Yeah. And then the embarrassment that will ensue when you invite both of them to follow you to the bathroom and they see each other there.
Because we'd both definitely accept and head that direction immediately.
Man, too trusting.
All right, lightning round question. Number 1, New York style pizza or deep dish Chicago pizza?
Both.
Whoa.
That's the first time. That is the first time anyone ever gave you that answer.
I didn't know you could do that.
Making up our own rules tonight.
Well, that works.
Is that too much of a cheat? Because that is how I feel.
Yeah, that's your answer.
I think that's the American way to go, if you ask me, man.
Yeah, diplomatic.
One on top of the other.
All right, plain or peanut M&Ms?
Peanut.
There you go.
If you could have dinner with one human being that has lived throughout history, dead or alive, who would that be?
I don't have a good answer for that, to be honest. Probably my wife, Kiki. I know that sounds like a crazy, but it's so off. It's so infrequent that we just have a long, nice meal together. I would just choose her.
Oh wow, yeah, that's a good choice.
And I think maybe a second place would be that guy who received your original package that Tomasi may or may not have sent out to you.
To hear how what he's been doing with it the last 15 years.
he's still trying to finish it.
He's drawing his own fan fiction.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Time dilation, but I would still have to be able to move as fast during that time, not just perception of time, but and it would actually, I would like more hours in the day, essentially. Yeah, that'd be cool.
It's always always the deadline.
Every artist says that.
Every artist.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm unoriginal, but it's
no, it's funny.
You said it the best. Everyone else just says time control. You actually made it sound cool.
Make those deadlines. Yeah, that's true. He did make it sound cool.
To that point,
it's such a selfish thing too, isn't it? Like, I'm not saying I want to be able to feed all of the starving people or bring world peace. It's such a selfish thing. Yeah, I'd like to be able to hit my deadlines better, I guess.
They need their comics on time too, though, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Good point.
Help and create world peace.
About that real quick. So over the years, as we've gotten the chance to talk to so many artists, one thing that I make sure to do every time I read comics now is I did it anyway, but now I really make sure to read the book several times through, and at least once or twice, not even read, just take in the art page by page, because the common story that we always hear is how you guys are like slaving away in your offices hours and days, just kind of pouring all yourselves into it. And I'm like, I can't imagine just flipping through this thing once and not like soaking it up. I feel so terrible for you guys.
Yeah, I hear you on that one, definitely.
That's awesome. I that's how I read comics as well. But I'm glad that you're doing that, and thank you for the extra effort.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Frank Miller always said that the key goal for creators in the business is to somehow slow down the reader, and to get them into the story. So. What was the best advice you were ever given, and who gave it to you? Whatever comes to mind.
Wow, the best advice ever. So this doesn't have to be,
or like
art,
or really good advice if you can.
Anything.
Yeah.
Wow, it's it's such a big question. I guess it would be. I remember being. Like there's a certain time of year that makes me feel sad because of like people who have passed and just general stuff. And I remember being down and feeling sad. And I spoke to my cousin on the phone, and he said, and this is going to sound really simple, but he said, it's okay to feel down. It's okay to be kind of sad or depressed from time to time, and like there's a reason that you feel that way, and it's okay to acknowledge it. And basically it's not like a weakness, or if it is a weakness, it's okay to be weak sometimes, to take a breather, to sort of address those feelings, but to try not to get stuck there and to move past it. He said something along those lines, and that it really made a big difference or a big impact to me at that time. And I've tried to keep that in mind, and I've told other people that same thing. Who knows if it affects them the same way, but it was like he was giving me permission to show weakness or to not feel at 100%. And I, for some reason, really needed that.
That's very good advice. Definitely. We have a thing here where our previous guest will give us a question for our next guest, and then that current guest will give us the next question, for the next guest, and so on and so forth.
I warned him beforehand that Donnie Cates left a doozy.
Oh yeah, Donnie Cates definitely dropped a ball or a rock on this one. Robin, you wanna?
Yeah, I believe I'm quoting it accurately here. So this is Donnie Cates' question. It was actually a question that he said was sent to him for the podcast that he does with Ryan Stegman. And he was just so struck by how profound the question is that he had to share it. So it went something like this. If two guys were stranded on the moon and one guy killed the other guy with a rock, would that be fucked up?
What?
Yep. Yeah, we had a huge debate because I asked Donnie, well, is he killing somebody with Dwayne Johnson, or is he killing somebody with a DVD of the movie with Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage? Like, it gets deep, this question.
No context at all.
Was the one guy there? No context. So we had to debate. Like, was one guy trying to destroy the moon, so the other guy stopped him?
That would throw off the lunar cycle and the waves,
Exactly.
the tides.
So he may have been killing a guy, but was he doing it to save us all? and unfortunately, it's now your job to answer this question.
I do feel like I have to rein in one of those options, which was one of you had said that it doesn't mean that the Rock was there. Did they try to use the Rock to kill the other guy? And to me, the nature of that question eliminates that possibility, because it's if there are two guys on the moon and one of them uses the Rock. It seems like that would infer that there's now a third person on the moon instead of just two.
Unless it was his carcass, then does that?
Or unless that's you consider the Rock to be just a guy.
The Rock also refers to himself in the third person. So what if he's the guy that kills him with the Rock?
Or does that make it 6 people? No, 5 people. If there's person.
And is the Rock cooking while doing this? If you know what I mean.
And what is he cooking?
On the moon, in space, no one can smell what you're cooking.
I think definitively I can say I don't know. But that's the definitive answer. All I know that says maybe. That's a quote from Futurama. The neutrals were like, all I know is my gut says maybe.
Nice.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question. I'm gonna say yes. I think the killing of one dude by the other dude is almost always, even if they have good reason to do it, it's still. Would you say messed up? Was that what?
Yeah. Well, his words were effed up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's what his words were.
I think it is. Even if they have good reason, it's still pretty messed up.
Yeah.
I'd have to agree, because no matter the context, a murder is still kind of messed up.
And before we get a question from you for our next guest, I forgot to ask you in the lightning round, who is your favorite Ninja Turtle and why?
Leo. I've always been drawn to leaders. I was raised without a father. So I'm always, I guess, psychologically I'm always drawn to leaders. So, Superman, Captain America, though I was drawn to Spock, not Kirk. And, Leo fits in there. And I like the dynamic where he's the team leader, but there's still a father in the group of Splinter. So, Leo's always been my favorite. And apparently he's like, I rarely hear that Leo is somebody's favorite, I guess, because he's too much of a wet blanket or something like that. Because he's always the conscience of the team or something.
He was always mine when I was a kid, but, I like the color blue and I like katanas, so, the swords were really cool. But,
I can't remember who this was. Maybe someone listening will remember, but there was a creator who had tweeted something sometime within the past year, I think. And he just said randomly, if I could get rid of one of the Ninja Turtles, it would be Michelangelo. Because do we really need a party dude on the team?
Damn. He's the kind of guy who'll kill somebody else on the moon with a rock. That's the kind of guy.
Yeah.
He messed up. So, yeah. That's
all this time we didn't know Michelangelo was the victim.
Jeez. Now, do you have can you think of a question for our next guest? Anything at all. It can be anything.
Yeah, anything.
If it helps, you may have 2 people to tandem answer. If everything goes to schedule, the next people on will be Mitch Gerrards and Doc Shaner.
Oh, okay. All right. I was not prepared, even though Robin had told me that there was a Q&A, or not a Q&A, but a question that was asked by the previous, and that that was a typical thing. I didn't think of a question ahead of time, so
I think it's best when the questions just stem from something we talked about in the conversation.
Yeah, off the top of your head. Describe everything that is not purple, or can you describe everything that's not purple? How about that? Would that be good?
I would be interested to see someone grapple with that.
Okay.
I love that.
I don't know. That's the weirdest, but it almost sounds like it would make sense, but how could you? I don't know.
Well, how could you answer Donnie's question? So, sometimes it's the questions that you can't answer that that are the most interesting.
That is true. But man, Freddie, we want to thank you so much for your time. You've opened up a great can of worms. Let me tell you something with Batman TMNT and everything else you do in the comic book genre. But it's handled it so well, and coming from a hardcore fan of both franchises, I'm glad that I'm happy. I'm appreciative that you hopped on the show so I could express my gratitude for like really merging my a group of my favorite heroes together. That I grew up with. So
thank you so much.
Can we just run over again one more time what cons people can find you at coming up?
Yes, for the first quarter of the year, it's going to be Fan Expo in Vancouver, Canada. And then after that, the amazing Honolulu, Hawaii Con. And then after that, it's the Lubbock, Texas show. That will be the very last day of February. This is a leap year, so February 29th and March 1st. And then going to the Supernova shows in Australia, and that would be in Melbourne and then Gold Coast. And then coming back here to Kansas City, Missouri, where there's Planet Comic-Con. I'll also be at, I think it's been announced, MegaCon in Florida in April. And then there's a few other shows that haven't been announced yet.
Nice.
So it's a busy year for conventions.
You're all over the place. Well, sheesh. Well, aloha.
Aloha.
Hey, Gotham dwellers. Make sure to stop everything right now and subscribe to Bat Force Radio. We can be found on iTunes and SoundCloud. Don't miss out. Guaranteed to satisfy all of your Batman and DC needs.